Who does not love that intro? Everyone does. It's so bold. I love it. I'm Kristen Hancock. Hi, everyone. We are back for our September live stream of ICology Presents. Wait, I need a logo in the top corner. There it is. Amazing. I'm super thrilled to be here today because we have a friend from across the pond, so to speak, with us. And I am so excited to welcome the one and only Jenni Field to ICology Presents. Hello, Jenni. Welcome. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. I'm good. How are you? What an intro. I love that
Isn't
music.
it
It was
great?
making
I
me really
know.
like, yeah. It's like,
It
yeah,
jazzes you
go.
up. It's the perfect bold intro for the perfect bold communicator. I do want to hear where everyone is from. Let us know in the comments where you're joining from, what kinds of exciting things you're up to today. I also want to know, because we're talking about leadership, I want to know, and Jenni wants to know, your biggest challenges connecting with leadership. I know you have them. We all have them. So we want to hear about them. But first and foremost, let us know where you're at, where you're joining from. We're doing this session a little bit earlier than normal so that our friends in the UK can join. So hopefully Jenni has rounded up some UK friends. I am building my UK friend group and I am accepting all of the applications of people who would like to be my UK friend. Jenni and I were chatting off screen earlier that I am going to be in London for the very first time in my entire life in November. I'm going to have tea at the Ritz. It's going to
Yay.
be a magical British experience. I did also ask Jenni what the likelihood of me running into the Spice Girls is. She said it's relatively low, and that's okay. I'm not going to hold that against you, Jenni. That's fine. So yes, let us know where you're from. Would love to see where everyone's joining us from, what kinds of leadership challenges you have. Jenni is treating us to a presentation today for, let's say, 15-20 minutes. And then we're doing Q&A. We've got all kinds of live Q&A time. So please pop your comments and your questions into the chat. And I will filter and carefully curate them so that when Jenni is finished her presentation, we will have some time for all the Q&A. Kristen Cook is joining us from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the metropolitan city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Probably it's like the London of America, probably Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Chuck wants to talk about your fabulous hair color. I agree. Can we talk about that?
Is it looking particularly purple? Because I have a sort of
Yes.
navy blind next to me.
So
if I take it all the way down, it kind of goes more purple.
It's looking purple. And on top of that, it's kind of like ICology branded in a lot of ways.
See? And then I'll do.
This is
There we go.
Like the ultimate guest tip of the hat is that Jenni has colored her hair to match the ICology branding. So, I mean, does it get better than that? I don't think so. Oh, Erica's joining us from Central Arkansas, a lovely autumn morning, as it is in Indianapolis as well. It's a lovely, I actually took photos this morning of how lovely the autumn morning was here. So is that a UK thing? Do we say autumn in the UK or do you say fall or both?
No, we say autumn. We never say fall. So it's autumn. And it was cold here this morning. I was up and out at about 7 a.m. here, and it was 3 degrees. It was cold. So
that's chilly.
that was I was not prepared for that.
Translate, I'm horrible at translating temperatures, but I think that's like maybe like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm rubbish. I mean, I'll say yes, but I've got no idea.
Speaking of temperatures, greetings from Phoenix. So that's a nice, lovely hotspot for look at this. We've got all kinds of people. We've got Austin, Texas. Amazing. I have not been there. Hello, Crystal. We've got Alyssa's here from Philadelphia, just outside Philly. Oh my gosh. Leanne is from Atlanta. We're covering a lot of ground here, and I'm not surprised. So I will keep them coming. We're going to chat with everyone. This is what I'm going to do to introduce Jenni. Jenni Field does not need an introduction in the internal comms community. So if you would like to look at her incredible list of accomplishments and business success, you connect with her on LinkedIn, creep her on social media. Here we go. This is Jenni Field on Twitter. Here we go, at Mrs. Jenni Field. Jenni has a very unique, special quality about her. There are many people in our industry who like to talk the talk. and they do not live it in their everyday life. And Jenni is a person who does. Jenni is a person who has integrity and stays true to her word. Jenni is not someone who backs down from challenges or conflict. And she does it in a way that is authentic and has integrity. So, Jenni, I admire that about you. I appreciate that about you. It is increasingly rare, I think, in the world, never mind in our industry. So thank you for bringing that to our profession and bringing that to ICology today. So without any more chit chat on my end, I'm going to let Jenni take it away. She's got some really cheeky slides. This is my UK speak for you. So she's going to go through those and share all of her wisdom. And then, like I said, keep your questions coming in the chat. I'm going to monitor them. We'll have lots of time for Q&A after this. So Jenni, take it away.
Thank you very much. So I am going to be a little bit bold. If you've ever heard me speak before, you'll know that's something I quite like to do. And I wanted to kick off today to share a story with you, really, around leadership. Because when I was talking to Kristen about what we were going to talk about today, I was really keen that we address something that was on the mind of ICology members, because there's no value in me showing up here and talking about something that isn't helpful. And one of those things is leadership relationships, how we can engage better with leaders, how we can build the relationships, and how we can deal with sometimes quite challenging situations. So I want to take you back a little bit in my career with me, where I was told to off out of my CEO's office. And it's a story that I often tell people who are looking at ways to engage with leaders. And it's a story that I tell about my career and my journey as to where I am today. So I want to take you back probably about 8 years ago. And I walked into my CEO's office having recently been appointed as a global head of communications. And it was an internal promotion, but different CEOs. So there's quite a lot of change going on. The organization had changed from being a private company to a public company. So what's going on? So as I'd taken over the function, I wanted to make sure that the function was doing what it needed to do. So like any good communicator, I decided to have a look at our budget, where we were spending money, what we could do differently. And I asked some of the senior team what they thought of some of the agencies that we were working with and maybe what we could do a bit differently, and just get a bit of a feel for what was going on. And I was merrily doing this piece of work and talking to different people in the leadership team. And the CEO called me into their office and said, "I understand you're having a review of this agency." And I said, "Yes." And they said, "I understand you've spoken to this person and this person." And I said, "Yes, I've done all of that." And I'm looking at it thinking, this is going to be great because they really care about numbers and financials and value, and this is going to be really good. And they said to me, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but off out of my office." And I laughed because I thought they were joking. And then I quickly realized that they weren't joking, and I left the office. And then about 3 minutes later, thought, no, I can't leave this like this. So I went back in and said, at the risk of making this worse, how can I make this better? And they said to me, "That's not my problem," and carried on working. And this was a pivotal moment in my career about how to work with leaders, about the power that leaders can have over us, and also how impactful words can be. And it's often where I will talk about the fact that sometimes leaders leave us feeling very deflated. And when you're doing the job of a communicator, you are constantly striving for the organization and the people in it to be better. You are constantly trying to make people think differently, to focus on the audience, to do something a different way. So when something comes back at you like that, you just end up feeling incredibly deflated. And I've spent a lot of my career feeling deflated. And my career has spun nearly 20 years working from a communications assistant up to a communications director. And there are lots of stories in working with leaders that have happened to me along the way. But this one is particularly important because we then didn't speak for, I would say, almost 3 months, bearing in mind I sat outside their office. And in the end, they did apologize and we moved forward and everything was fine. And the apology was very genuine and we worked through quite a lot of stuff together. And I learned a huge amount from that individual. But it was such an important milestone for me that it helped me understand more about who I was, understand more about how you manage relationships, understanding more about the importance of leaders and how to work better with them. And since then, I have changed some of the things that I have done in my career. And in fact, this morning I was speaking to a group of communicators for a retail organization, and we were talking about communication and trends and all those kind of things. And it's always really interesting for me because I can reflect on my own career and how things have changed. And I was talking about how when I was much younger or much earlier on in my career, I used to get incredibly passionate about the need for things to be done. We have to do it this way. We have to do this. And I would be constantly challenging. And then I had to really start asking myself the question of, is it a hill I want to die on? Because if you continue to fight all the time when you're deflated, it's really exhausting. And if you're working with leaders who don't really get it or want to go their own way or don't see the value in communications, you can feel like you're constantly challenging and challenging and challenging. But as I've grown in my career, I've had to stop and think about, is it a hill I want to die on? And that's because somebody once said that to me, one of my directors. And I remember somebody working for me saying, when they left, they said, I've gone from working with someone who fights everything to working with someone who fights nothing. And I kind of want to find someone in the middle. And I thought that's really true, because we have to find the things that we want to challenge, because you can't challenge everything when you're working with a leadership team. Because if you're challenging everything, it becomes very difficult for you to build relationships and to have that credibility and all the things that are important that we're trying to do. So we have to decide what are the things that we are going to challenge. And that's important when you start to work through your career, to make sure that you're not just over challenging everybody, which is really easy to do. But one of the big things I've learned is the importance of listening. And it's very easy to say it's really important for us to listen, but you have to really listen. And I'm going to give you another story, an example of when I was working with a leadership team and they used the word value all the time. How does this add value? How does that add value? And it was very commercially minded. It was all about making sure that we were bringing in shareholder return. So everything was focused on value. And I remember thinking, I don't know what they mean by value when we talk about communications. But even before I got to that point, I was starting to watch what was happening. And as I was watching the conversations, I was watching in the board meetings, watching in the commercial meetings, and everything was about data. Everyone had to bring reams and reams of data to make decisions and value. So I thought, great, I will get all the data I can about internal communications and engagement to really demonstrate what we're doing, because if data is the answer, I'll do that. So I went and I got all these reports and all this data. And it just didn't land at all. In fact, if anything, I think they probably just went straight in the bin because there was no interest in this data at all, because there was no perceived value of communication from the leadership team. So having tried that avenue, I thought, right, I've got to try something else. And that's where I started to listen to the words like value. What value does it bring? What value does it bring? And in the end, I had to go in and ask the question, when you talk about value, what does that mean in terms of communication? Because I don't really know. And given that I was having this conversation with the person that told me to out of their office, you can imagine I didn't go in full of joy to ask the question, but it needed to be asked. So I asked that question and they said, well, really, for me, the value you bring is around risk and reputation. So my role at that time was as global head of communication. So I looked after both internal and external. And I thought, okay, it's about risk and reputation. I can work with this for internal comms, because actually I can now understand that I need to frame things about risk. So rather than me going in and saying, I really need to go over to the team in the US, in Washington, to really engage them in our digital platform, because they're just not engaged with it. They're not really using it. And they're talking about going off and getting SharePoint at the time. And then we didn't have that. We had IBM connections. And there was a real, like, you don't need to go and do that. We don't need to go, don't need to go, don't need to go. Once I understood value, I listened to the language. I was able to reframe that and say, there's a risk they're going to spend £500,000 on a different platform. So I think I need to go over there to help them understand how to use this one so that we don't end up spending more money. And I was out there for a week in the end, helping train the team on how to use the existing platform that we had and how to do that differently. We did workshops with the whole organization. It was much easier. But I had to really tune into the language that they were using. And I had to really understand what that meant. And that meant having the courage and the confidence to ask that difficult conversation. That question wasn't easy to go in and ask. But if I hadn't asked it, I'd have been carrying on doing things and feeling more and more deflated and dying on every hill. So that moment of discomfort was actually what allowed me to really take the function and the organization forward for just 5 minutes of feeling a bit uncomfortable. So it was totally, totally worth it. The other thing that's important with leadership teams is the need to adapt. And quite often as communicators, people talk about what's the best way to engage with leaders? What's the best thing to share with them? What's the best way to do this? We always like to know what's the best way of doing something. But actually, in my experience, it's about adapting to your audience. And we talk about this a lot in communications, but we don't often practice it in the relationships that we have inside organizations. So we have to be able to adapt. And I felt this when I left the organization that was all about value and risk and detail and data. And I went to a pharmaceutical organization that was going through a merger and acquisition. Sort of, it was a merger. Yes, language is important for me on those two. It was a merger. And I was setting up the function for them. And I remember there was a person that had been working on the merger before I arrived. And they had a list of things we were doing. And we had a list of budget that we needed. And they were saying, oh, I'm going to go into the management team meeting while you're in Devon, one of the other sites in the UK. And I'm going to ask for this budget. And it was about £70,000. And I was beside myself that we were going into this management meeting without any preparation at all. And what looked like something that was just written on a scribbly bit of paper on a bar somewhere that was like, oh, we need this and we need this and we need this. And I was terrified. Anyway, they went in and they came back within 5 minutes and said, oh, we got budget. It was fine. And I couldn't believe it because I hadn't come from an environment where that would even get through at all with that level of preparation. And as I continued to work with the leadership team there and I sat on the management team, I had to very quickly adapt to how they worked. It wasn't about the detail and the data. They wanted top level summaries, more visual stuff. They didn't want reams of reports. That wasn't how they worked. So I had to flip what I did in order to get the results that I needed. And that was a hard thing for me, having spent at least 6-7 years doing something one way, but I had to flip it around. Don't try and make them come to you. They won't adapt to your style because you need them more than they need you. And that's slightly uncomfortable, but it's important that we change in order to get the results that we want. That doesn't mean that you become a complete chameleon and change everything about you. It's about making sure that you understand what someone needs to make a decision. And that's not going to be the same for every leadership team in every organization anywhere. So that's a big one for me when it comes to how do we get what we want from our leadership team. The other thing is about checking your language. Now, this is something I feel quite strongly about, and I think Chuck will probably support this as well, is we kind of make up phrases and words in our industry, and then we use them regularly with people that aren't in our industry and expect them to know exactly what we're talking about. And that doesn't really help us in terms of helping the organization change. So when we are talking to leaders, we have to make sure that we're talking in a language that is appropriate for the business and not language that maybe we've become comfortable with in our industry. And employee voice is a really good example of this for me, where we talk a lot about employee voice in internal communications, the importance of employee voice. It was listed quite a lot in the pillars of employee engagement, if you're looking at engagement. And it came through quite strongly. And I remember having this conversation with people. I think I was teaching on a diploma and someone said, what's employee voice? And I said, oh, it's just being able to hear from employees. And it's like, oh, okay. I don't know why we don't just say that. And that's exactly what we've done. We've kind of created things that sometimes don't really help us. And I think that's really important when it comes to working with leaders. We talk a lot about business acumen. We talk a lot about talking the language of the business, understanding what the business phrases are. The example I gave you earlier about value, what does value mean? Listen to the language that they're using and use that, but don't ask the question, or don't use language rather that is going to be missed by leaders. They won't know what that means because it's not something that's used by everybody. So we have to be mindful and just aware of what's become a bit of jargon in our own industry and not let that sort of bleed out into some of our leadership conversations. The other piece that I always talk about is the importance of getting to know people as individuals. And I've put Mickey Mouse on the screen here because I always come back to the Disney principles. And it's the Disney principles of customer service. So if I'm talking to teams about how to change customer service or what to do differently, these 4 principles are what I always come back to. And when I think about the work with leaders and boards and different teams, when I worked inside organizations, this was fundamental to me being able to influence and persuade at a senior level. So the 4 principles from Disney are make people feel special, treat them as individuals, have knowledgeable staff that can help me, and show me respect no matter what. And that plays out to me in every relationship that we should be striving to have in and outside the workplace. But if you think about your leadership team, how are you doing those 4 things if they are your customers? And whenever I had a big presentation to the board or I had to get some budget through or whatever it might be, I would go and speak to everybody individually. I'd want to hear what they thought about this project or this piece of work. I wanted them to have time to have a conversation with me so that when it came to the board meeting or the presentation or the budget setting, we had more of a connection, more of a relationship. I listened to them, really listened to them. And I had their individual feedback so I could tailor things based on what they'd said. So I was able to apply some of the Disney principles without really realizing it to help me get the result that I needed. Those people felt listened to, they felt special, they were treated as individuals. All of those things made sure that I was someone that they could rely on because the relationship was invested in. And that's fundamentally important when it comes to leaders. It's very easy to say, oh, I don't have a relationship with a leadership team because I'm just an internal comms manager and there's all these people above me, right? That doesn't matter. It's also very easy to say, oh, but I just need to get a seat at the table and then it will be fine. If you can't influence without a seat at the table, you won't influence with a seat at the table. It's that straightforward. You have to be able to influence and persuade wherever you sit in an organization. And that's using your network, using your people, using some of these principles to help you influence, persuade, get the results that you need to get. But you should be able to do that wherever you are because it's just about building relationships and it's about being helpful and all of those things that we need to be. Which leads me nicely on to the need to be credible. And I talk about credibility a lot. It's something I will be talking about a lot more as we go into next year. But it's something that for me is incredibly important for us as communicators, but it's incredibly important for leaders as well. But this is about us as communicators. How credible are you? And when we think about credibility, what does that really mean? So I've been doing a lot of research and reading in this space, and credibility is quite individual. So who I perceive as credible, you may not perceive as credible. But to me, credibility is more important than being authentic. And as a communicator, if you're going to be credible, you've got to be trusted, you've got to demonstrate goodwill, and you've got to have honesty and integrity. And you've got to have expertise. And if you don't have those things, then it's going to be very difficult for you to have the relationships that you need with the leadership team in order to have the success that you need. So when I talk about being trusted, being credible, being the expert, that's why investing in your development is so important. It's why being part of networks like ICology is really important. It's why reading books is important, or listening to podcasts or attending events, because you can bring the outside world in to help you demonstrate that credibility. In the work that I do, I'm so often talking about the fact that I'm qualified or I'm chartered or I've got a certificate in how to be a company director or I'm an accredited facilitator. I've done lots because I'm a dork and I love to learn. But it's important for me that there is a credibility when I'm in a room talking to a board or a leadership team, that they know that I know what I'm talking about. And I think that that's important, no matter where you sit in the organization. Have, build the trust, have integrity, say, do and say all the things that are right. If you say you're going to do it, do it. If you don't show up on time, you're chipping away at those little things of trust. So invest in that time so that they see you as credible. Because when you're then coming to them to ask for budget, or you're coming to them to ask for their sponsorship of a project, or you're coming to them because you need more content, they will only do that with you if the relationship is there, and that relationship is built on credibility. So that's fundamentally important for any relationship, but for communicators and the weight we have, it's really, really important. So they are all of my slides because I didn't want to spend too long waffling on at you around the different things that are important. And I really wanted to have more of a conversation. So I don't know if there are any questions that might have come in, but I'm hoping Kristen can pop back and let me know if there is anything. Hello.
I'm back. I'm here. Jenni, the chat is lit. So first of all, Chuck and Dan Holden are having a fight about SharePoint. And so that's how that's going. I'm
fair.
It's not really a fight. I think Chuck thinks it's a fight. I'm not sure Dan is aware what he's in for here. That started because listen, it started because here, I also want this on the record. For those of us who like to fight for what we think is right, you can't fight all the time. I want this on the record that my partner in life and work has said you can't fight for everything all the time. And then it turned into, does anyone really like SharePoint? But I will also say, Alyssa, this was the very beginning of your presentation about being told to get the F out of the office. She's like, whoa. I'm not going to ask you if you cried, but I'm going to tell everyone that I would have. I would have walked out
No,
of
I
that
did.
office and I would have walked into the bathroom and I would have hid in a stall and I would have cried because I would have been mortified. So
Yeah.
kudos to you for getting through it and also being able to share the story now, and we can appreciate it and have a little laugh if we need to. But I think it's those impactful moments that then make us better communicators, right? There is also, I felt the same way, Kristen. If you can't be influential without a seat at the table, you won't be influential with a seat at the table. I like this take, actually, Jenni. I like your take better. I think I'm going to adopt this one. I'll give you credit for it. I used to often say, and I know Chuck has echoed this, there are lots of other people in the industry who have echoed this, like we spend so much time whining about not having a seat at the table that we're not getting anything done. Like it's not the seat at the table that's going to make you this communicator. So sometimes they'd be like, well, build your own damn table. And now I'm like, screw the table, just work on credibility and that piece of it as well. The trust piece, it struck me when you said, show up on time, because that's how trust is built in very small increments along the way that people know that they can trust you. Alyssa says, loves the hot take about being credible is being more important than being authentic. I like this, and my brain is processing it. So I want to hear more about this credibility before authenticity. I want to know. So are we saying then it is more important to build trust before you worry about being authentic, so to speak?
So I'm currently working this through. So full disclosure, you're getting an insight into my brain at the moment and a project I'm working on. But I don't think being authentic is the goal. I think being credible is the goal. Ooh. And I will give you an example of, and I'm going to use some politicians because that's the easiest way to explain it. This does not in any way dictate my political preferences. Caveat. So if we were to take Donald Trump or Boris Johnson, I would say they are both authentic people. So they are authentically themselves.
Okay, however, that's a fair comment.
I don't know that they are credible in the jobs that they may have been doing.
That's a great example.
And that's where my head goes in terms of, is it about being authentic, or actually is it about being credible? And then what are the component parts of credibility that allow us to see someone as credible? And that's the project I'm working on at the moment, and researching and reading about what it is that does that. Because in all the work that I have done over my career, credibility is always what I want to come back to. I want to be seen as credible. I want you to believe me. I want you to trust me. I want you to like me, but I don't mind if you don't like me, as long as you can see why I've done certain things and the outcome of those. So it's all of that stuff in there for me. That's where credibility is more important than being authentic.
I love that. Yeah, I think that is, I know people always hesitate to use politicians as examples, but that's a fantastic example. Yeah, it is a really fantastic example. I think what I when we talk about credibility, and one of your stories was talking about the data behind things. And in my one of my last corporate roles, we had a change in leadership. Our executive director retired, and so someone new filled her spot. And I had gotten, now in years later, I can reflect back on my own experience and my own behavior then. I had gotten very comfortable with the previous leader because we had built that trust. And so she knew what I was going to do and I knew what she was going to do. And we kind of went on our merry way and did our jobs. And then when this new leader came in, it was a similar feeling where I thought she was really questioning my ability, my credibility, my role, what our team was doing. And I took
Mhm.
it very personally. And I look back now and realize I shouldn't have. It's okay that I took it personally because I do value what I do and I, want to be seen as credible and professional, all of that. But it's more important that I just recognize that this person is new. She doesn't know me. We haven't built up that trust. So the questions she's asking me are not questions, she's not questioning me. She's asking
Mhm.
questions, right? And she's asking me
Yes.
to bring forward the data. Of course, that's easy to see in hindsight, but I appreciate um I appreciate the clarification on what that means and getting used to being uncomfortable sometimes in those situations where this head of the company is questioning you, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now Alyssa is saying something else. We're in the workplace. We need to show results. I'm here to communicate, not to make friends. Alyssa you sound like you're on The Bachelor. You know when all the women, you have The Bachelor in the UK? Yes, you do.
Yeah,
You
I
know when
do,
they're
yeah.
like, I'm not here to make friends. That's what that's what I think of every time. I know
I
Alyssa, I'm not saying that personally, but
I love this. So I've always said this around being at work. I don't go to work to make friends. And I've said it so often that my family now take the mickey out of me. But where and it's also why I can run my own business, because it's not a core value for me of why I go to work. Whereas if friends is a core reason to go to work, that's why you might not want to work on your own. But I always had a person at work. So there's been a lot of talk about the importance of friendships at work
Mhm.
recently and how we all need a friend. So I'm a big believer in you need a person, to coin Grey's Anatomy. Like, I have a person that I can go
Is
to
that
have a
where that
coffee,
came
or
from?
that's
Grey's
where it came
Anatomy?
from for me. Like, yeah, you're my
Oh, I didn't know
person.
that. Okay. Anyway, sorry.
It might not. Feel free to wade in the chat. That's
Right,
where I know it
weigh
from.
in if you know where
Um,
my person came from.
So I have a person, but I have my friends. My friends are great and I love them dearly. And I want to come home from work and see my friends. I don't always have friends at work, but I've probably got a person in each place that I've worked. So I'm seeing someone for breakfast in October who I used to work with, who I haven't seen for a couple of years. So I've got sort of people, but
Yeah,
I think to be a leader, you have to make very difficult decisions. So you can't always be focused on, I want people to like me and I want to have friends, because you're having to make decisions that are really difficult and it's quite lonely. And a communicator's job can be quite lonely. So if you're a leader and a communicator, that's tough. So
yeah,
it's being able to your point about the questioning, is they weren't kind of questioning me, they were just asking questions. And that's a really
right.
important distinction for us to make. It's not trying to take stuff too personally, because we can often feel like it's a bit of a personal attack. But when
Yeah,
you were talking about the new leader coming in, it reminded me of some advice that I always share with people if they're going through a leadership change, is go and find the communicator who worked with that leader before in their old company. So I remember getting a new CEO and he came from another organization. So I found the internal comms manager and said, can we go for coffee so I can learn more about Mark? And so she filled me in on what she did and what he thought of comms and their relationship. So I knew before he arrived whether he valued comms, what he thought comms was, because it's so broad. So what's his perception of it? What was he like? All those kind of things. And that was hugely valuable. So I always say to people, do that, because it was such a good idea that I had all those years ago.
Jenny, I'm gonna share with the internet right now that I'm having a very vulnerable moment because when you said that, I also now have realized another I guess I'll call it a mistake maybe or a failure on my part, which is okay. We can acknowledge those things.
Mm-hmm.
So this same situation, this new leader comes in. One of my biggest frustrations, oh, I'm so embarrassed to share this, but I'm going to do it in the cone of courageous vulnerability. One of my biggest irritations was that she was constantly telling me to get in touch with this comms person that she used to work with. And I didn't. Oh, Jenni, I instead of embracing that and thinking, okay, you know what? That's a good idea. Maybe then I'll get to
Yeah.
know this new leader better. My ego was like, are you kidding me? Why would I contact your old comms person? I know what I'm doing here.
But that's such a normal human reaction, right? Because it's said in a way that is kind of comparative and not helpful, and so I can completely understand why you would feel like that. Because I would
Thank
be
you,
like,
Jenni, because I
absolutely
was
not.
like, what
Like,
a jerk I was.
how dare you imply that I'm no good? Because that's how it would
Yeah.
feel. Whereas actually, when you make that decision yourself to go, actually, I'm
Yes.
going to go find out what they were like, it's a very different, the intent isn't there. And that's the other thing about trust is we judge ourselves by our intent. We judge others by their behavior. So you don't
Yeah.
know what her intent was when she was saying to you, go and speak to the old comms person.
That's
All
fair.
you're seeing is her behavior going, speak to my old comms person,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And
interpreting that
I was like,
in
is
the
she trying
way,
to like
yeah,
fire me and bring in the old comp, like her other I
yeah.
spiraled. It was, yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Whereas if they'd said, look, I think you'd really benefit from talking to my old comms person
Yeah.
because she found a way to work with me that wasn't frustrating and I can
Yeah.
appreciate that
Yeah.
I can be irritating. So
Right.
go and
Right.
talk, then you'd be fine.
Well, this is therapy today, so that's great. Gary, who's based in Chicago, in some ways, the seat at the table is a stop along the way to the seat across the desk where that trusted advisor dialogue happens. That's a really interesting. Tell me, Jenni. So Jenni's company is called Redefining Comms. I'm curious how much of your role in working with clients now is almost coaching either the leaders or the comms people?
So it's a mix really. So because we have a team of people that are doing more of the supporting the comms team with the delivery or events or content and things like that, my
Okay.
role is quite often trying to diagnose the root cause of chaos, and that's kind of what we focus on. So I'm working with I'm working with an organization at the moment who's been through rapid growth, which is quite normal at the moment, and they're in a chaos because of the growth. So we're doing one-to-one conversations with the leadership team as part of the insight. And that becomes slightly coaching-y
Mhm.
because you're trying to get insight and ask all the inquisitive conversations. And then we have to have the difficult conversations after that. So you have to be in a coaching frame of mind to do that because you're having to tell them kind of what's going on and how they are contributing to that chaos. And that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my work is shining a light on the things that feel uncomfortable in order to help people move forwards. And that's very difficult because it kind of comes back to that. I don't come in to kind of make friends. There are clients that I've worked with where there are people in those organizations who will hate me forever.
Oh,
And they won't
interesting.
know kind of maybe what was being done to help them achieve what they really wanted to achieve. They will just see the behavior is not the intent. And that's
Right.
fair. But sometimes you have to be the person that has the difficult conversations in order for things to move forward. So a lot of the to coin the phrase, if it's across the desk, a lot of my work is across the desk. But you have to be able to build trust quite quickly to do that, which is where the credibility comes in, so that people already will trust the insights that I'm bringing based on the credibility that I can kind of come with, which is the magic that you're trying to kind of get to.
What would be something that you would share with internal communications people who are trying to build that rapport and trying to build the relationship with, it doesn't have to be, the CEO. Maybe it's just the director of your department or whoever that leader role is. Is it like knocking on their door and asking for a meeting? Is it less bold than that? Where does it start?
So it's easy. Sometimes when I talk and do things like this, people will say it's easy for you because you're really confident and you can just go in there and ask the questions. And I am more confident now, but that's because I've learned and invested in myself.
Mm,
Walking into that office and saying, what does value mean and stuff was, scary. So it comes with that investment in yourself to be able to do that. The most important thing is to be helpful. So I've set up 4 communication functions in my career, and I'm going right back to when I was an internal communications officer about probably 12, 15 years ago. So, 23, quite, didn't really know what I was doing. Had no idea about an industry, nothing. And then you have to, when you're doing that, you have to be helpful. So it's having that natural curiosity that will help you build the relationships and build that rapport, because you have to listen to understand, not listen to solve. And you have to listen without judgment. So if you can go in and just say, look, what's going on? The question I always ask is, if you could change one thing about the communication here, what would you change? And how does it impact the organization? How is communication having an impact on you being able to do your job? You don't have to solve that for them there and then, but listening to them, somebody listening to you is incredibly powerful for relationship building. And that's all it is. And if you can't get your foot in the door to even have that conversation, then find other ways to be helpful. Speak to other people in that team that are maybe more junior, find out what the problems are. They might be running an event and you might say, look, I've done some event work. I can just give you like 10 things to try differently that will make this more engaging. You don't have to go in and run the event and take over, but you can be an advisor, you can coach, you can support. But the best way to do it is to find the ways that you can help. If knocking on the door and having that conversation is going to do it, then do that. If it's about finding the people that are around that you can use to influence, then do that. It's got to match your natural style so that you are authentic, but also credible. You don't want to do something that doesn't feel real for you, because that's not helpful either.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've also talked a lot about investing in yourself, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, which I know you'll roll with. So we just came out of our very first ICology event. Camp ICology was last week in Chicago, and I've got an interesting story what something you said reminded me of when we were there. You also have an event coming up called Comms Reboot.
Yeah.
Can people still register for it?
They can't, but if people do want a ticket, then I'm very happy to give them one, but it's only in the UK. It's not virtual. So
that's okay. That's okay. If you're in the UK, Jenni's going to hook you up. But so these events are super important for people in our industry. And one of the things that happened at camp last week, like I say camp, we were at a hotel in downtown Chicago. We were actually in the first up offices and then stayed in hotels, just in case anyone thought I was tenting somewhere. That's not what happened.
I'm definitely not.
Hysterical. Yeah. So I finagled a private tour of the Art Institute of Chicago. And one of the exhibits that we had the pleasure of experiencing was this photography exhibit that came out of the very early stages of COVID. And their curator wanted to do something that spoke to community and Chicago as a city. Phenomenal exhibit. Strongly recommend anyone goes to see it. But one of the really interesting stories from this exhibit was there's a photograph of a man, and the story behind it is that he is a steel worker. And so they wanted to get a photograph of him in his uniform as a steel worker. And he was like, no, I don't want just that. I want to be photographed with my wife and with my Elvis collection. He has this collection of Elvis memorabilia and things. And it was, we were all talking about it after as such a reminder that people want to be seen for who they are as people, which you mentioned earlier, right? It's one of those Disney principles of seeing people for who they are. And it was just such a good reminder that, like, yeah, he is a steel worker, but he's like, I also have a family and I also love Elvis. And, I am a more holistic human than my uniform would describe.
Yes.
So it was just a really lovely example of that. And also, of course, a good reminder to invest in yourself and do things like events. Alyssa has a question for you. Super amazing talk. Agreed. My organization is very focused on disrupting harmful power dynamics and being an anti-racist organization. How do we balance building a trusting relationship and also providing expertise?
Okay.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, there is. I've got more questions back at you. So, what's the relationship between the focus of the organization doing disrupting and the balancing of trust and expertise? Because I can't see that. I'm trying to see the correlation between there. So feel free to wade in the chat, because I think when you're disrupting and doing things and being very positive and driving change, it's going to be hard, because you're going to have people that are coming at you from all different perspectives and different belief systems and things like that. I think the important thing is to make sure that you aren't being performative in that space. And as a communicator, that you have read, developed, grown, all those things in terms of the area. So if you're looking at how to be trusted and deliver expertise when you're specifically focused on disrupting power dynamics and being an anti-racist organization, what are you doing to upskill yourself to be an anti-racist and to do that? So are you attending things like diversity and PR, which I know my good friend Avita Patel has just launched that event.
I saw that. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. So that's an online event. So are you going to that? Have you read books about me and white supremacy or Nice White Ladies? I think you read, didn't you, Kristen, which is on my bookshelf. So how are you upskilling in areas like that to kind of be able to help? Because that will help you become trusted. So we run workshops around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I don't run them on my own. I run them with Advita or with Trudy or with Sarah Black, other people in my team who are more experts in that space. But in doing that, I've learned so much about that side of communications and that side of belonging and inclusion. So I think that's how you do it. I think it's about focusing your energy into learning the specifics that will help your organization thrive and how you will best support that. Now, that's hard when there's so much out there. So it's kind of finding where you might want to specialize or niche in. And I have a real interest in neuroscience and how the brain works and how we respond to things differently. So people like Brene Brown are really interesting to me. Hilary Scarlett's book on neuroscience and change, fascinating. So I've spent more time looking at things like that, like what makes us credible? What does empathy really mean? All these questions. So, because that's what I want to talk more about, rather than spending my time investing in really becoming an expert in things like diversity and inclusion. Because I also believe that as a communicator, we have to be a bit of a T-shape. So we have to be knowledgeable enough across a broad spectrum of topics, maybe go deep on one or two, but maybe have experts around you that have the depth so that you balance it all out. Otherwise, you're going to try and be everything to everyone. And in that, you'll be no one to anyone. And that's not helpful either.
Yeah, it's almost like knowing enough to know when you don't know.
Totally. And I have this debate when there was all the talk about AI and PR and tech and, you know, and I remember building an intranet years ago and going to learn how to build it and sitting in a coding workshop for like 2 days in the UK thinking, what am I doing here? Because this is not my area of expertise. So I'm all for the fact that we need to learn and know enough, but also there will be people that want to go deep on that. And that's perfect because they're the experts that you pull in when you need them. And that's important.
And there are, especially with, Alicia's got some clarification here that I'll pull up, especially with the diversity, inclusion, belonging, all of those topics, there are phenomenal people in our industry and outside our industry who are experts in those fields. They have gone to school to do those. They have master's and PhD educations in those topics. They have written books. They host whatever. Lean on those
Talk to
people.
them.
Yes, talk to those people and help. And then you are the conduit, right? You're going to help communicate that. So to clarify, she's asking people to change behavior. Like not sending all staff emails. We've all been there. Steering committee leadership are not focusing on best practices and instead focusing on how easy it is to reply all.
Okay, so this is fine. So what you want to get them to think about is kind of the 6 keys to impactful communication. I've got a download on my website for that. You can just grab it. But and I talk about it on a couple of podcasts, I think. But it's about helping educate them that you need to communicate for your audience, not for yourself. So that's the fundamental piece for impactful communication. And it's not about what's easiest for you. It's about what's most helpful for the audience. But it's also getting them to think about what's the outcome you're looking for. So by replying to all or sending all staff emails, what's the outcome you're looking to achieve? Come back from the solution of the email. What's the outcome? And then working forward from that. That will really help. It also takes time. So I would turn off the ability to send all staff emails for anybody other than me. And that would often be one of the first things I'd do when I'd go in to an organization.
That is a bold take. I like it.
Turn off the tap. I'm just turning it off.
I like it.
And if you want to do it, you can come and talk to me and we'll have a conversation. So I'm very much a fan of when I go in to set up the function, I put my arms around everything and take it all in. And then I gradually let you have some of it back. So I've decided what's going to work.
We're learning from a queen here. And so just turn it off. Alyssa, just turn it off. Turn off the function completely.
Turn
And
it
then when
off.
people are like, what happened? You're like, I don't know. I guess you'll have to ask me about it. So what's the goal
Yeah.
here?
And then we'll have a conversation and then I'll let you know what's going to be the right thing to do.
I love it. I think too, the other thing I love that you mentioned earlier in your talk was about framing something in terms of risk.
Yeah.
Like we need to go talk to these offices because there's a risk that they're going to spend $500,000 on whatever. That gets attention because leaders are going to pay attention to that because there's risk and there's money.
Yes.
Right. And those two things do not coincide very well in the business world. And so, yeah, I love that. So I wonder too, for Alyssa or anyone else in this position, what is the risk? Right? What's the risk every time someone replies all? Like, what's the
Yeah.
risk for your culture? What's the risk, even from an IT perspective? Maybe there's some risk involved in that. I think that would be an interesting thing to explore as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think it can get really challenging. So in that organization that was very much about risk and reputation, I had to fight for budget every year for the digital platform, whereas most people just have to do one business case and you're in. Whereas I had to do a business case every single year as to how I was going to save the
Wow.
organization money. Honestly, it was hard work. So,
Yeah.
so when you're talking about the risk, and this is also important because this can be played out across anything in an organization. Why should I care? Like
Mm.
we're doing fine. Why would we need to change this? Even if I come back to diversity and inclusion again, we're fine for years. Why do we suddenly need to do this now? Why does it matter? It comes up again and again in the things that we need to do to be better. So where people are talking to you about things like the reply all email, why does it matter? That's about our own learning to be able to answer that question. So if someone said to me, why does it matter if I just reply to all? Everybody can then see my reply. Okay, well, it's adding noise to somebody's mailbox. So they're going to switch off. They're not going to read it. It's not helpful for anyone else to know what your reply is because you've just said, yes, that's fine. No one else needs to know that other than the person you're talking to.
Yep.
You've also then set a stool up in terms of what you're willing to share with everybody. So if I get another email from you, I might think you're just replying to something else. I'm just going to ignore it. And that could be an important email that I'm going to miss where you're asking me to do something. So just think about the people you're talking to and why you're having to do that. It's actually no different clicking reply or reply all. You just go slightly to the left. You can manage that.
I told you all this was going to be cheeky. The other button's right there. It's just to the left.
I don't know why that's hard. So I think it's having the relationships where you can have some of those conversations and make it light. Okay. Like I'm a big one for being a bit like, oh, is it really a problem? You know, so trying to do a bit of that. I think the risk piece more generally is valid if that's the objective of your board. So if you've got a board who are very risk aware, very reputation mindful, this is where it's important to also have a definition for what your function does. So what's the purpose of your communication function in your organization? What's your anchor point? What are you grounded in? Because if you are there to contribute to the employee engagement scores of the organization, which is a soapbox I'm not going to get on at all, but if that might be what you're there to do, then all of your activity should be designed to do that. Okay. If you're there to help the organization be more efficient by helping people communicate better across a global organization that's predominantly remote, and we need to look at how information flows and we need to make sure that that's working efficiently to ensure that we're hitting our targets, that's a very different comms function and a very different skill set needed than the other one. So you've got to be clear about what the purpose of your function is and how that's supporting the leaders and the organization in the alignment and the growth that it's looking to achieve.
I love it. In addition to being a credible internal communicator, Jenni is also a published author, which is pretty darn cool. Here's what I think would be a nice little cheeky move. So Jenni's book is called Influential Internal Communication. If that book happened to show up on your leader's desk, perhaps they might read it. And perhaps maybe it's a Christmas gift. Maybe this is what you are buying your CEO for Christmas is Jenni's book, and put a little bow on it, and it'll be like a little business gift, and then they'll read it and say, holy shit, we really need to make sure that we're doing a good job of this. I
love the
would
plug.
love that.
Thank you. And also
Jenni,
it's on Audible, so they can listen to me while they're traveling. So I recorded it, so it's more accessible, which is what I wanted. So they can listen while they work.
You've got book love. Kristen loved your book. Love it. It's
Oh,
on my
thank
bookshelf
you.
too. It should be on everyone's bookshelf. Okay, so I want to say thank you again to Jenni. You are amazing. Chuck says I'm practicing my British. It's true, I am. I don't want to offend anyone in the UK, but I am
Go
practicing
on
my
then. Go on.
British. Well, really, Jenni, what I wanted to say was that I really love your book, and I think it's
Oh,
fabulous. It's brilliant. Because is
very
that not
good.
bad? Okay.
That's not bad. That's
It's not
not
bad.
bad.
Jenni is at Mrs. Jenni Field on Twitter. You can connect with her on LinkedIn as well. Her website is redefiningcomms.com. We just came off of probably our best ICology week yet. We had Camp ICology in Chicago. It was a magical, magical success. Joinicology.com is our website. What I would love for people to do is join our newsletter list, because I'm putting out another newsletter this weekend and we're going to have some little camp stories in it. So I think that would be a fun thing for people to check out. If you are not already an ICology member, of course, we would love to have you in our community as well. Jenni, of course, is an ICology member. Jenni knows what's going on. Please connect with Jenni. Thank you so much for being part of this. It's a joy to chat with you. I know we answered quite a few questions, which is always a good thing as well. So everyone, have a phenomenal week. Enjoy all of your leadership conversations. Let us know how things are going for you, because I want to know if anyone had like wild success after this conversation. So thank you, Jenni. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us today. Have a wonderful week. We will see you again next month. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.